After more than a year of tough negotiations, a new NAFTA agreement has officially been signed. Canada, the U.S., and Mexico and their respective leaders held a signing ceremony to mark the milestone on neutral territory on the sidelines of the G20 in Argentina. The CBC's Katie Simpson is there for us. Katie?
Vashi, the Prime Minister looked downright cranky, having to stand next to President Donald Trump and sign this trade deal while steel and aluminum tariffs are still in place. It is a win for Canada that trade will continue with the U.S. and Mexico, but the Canadians had made a point of saying they would not be taking part in any sort of celebration with Donald Trump as long as those tariffs continued to be enforced. Today, they had to eat their words. But Justin Trudeau did try to pressure Trump into changing his mind.
Make no mistake, we will stand up for our workers and fight for their families and their communities. And Donald, it's all the more reason why we need to keep working to remove the tariffs on steel and aluminum between our countries.
The ceremony really came together at the last minute after some final tweaks were made to the new NAFTA. Canada pushed back on some provisions that require dairy farmers to share information with the U.S. government, while the Americans watered down protections for members of the LGBT community in the U.S. All of it seemed to be a pretty good deal from Donald Trump's perspective, who seemed relieved the negotiations are done.
We've worked hard on this agreement. It's been long and hard. We've taken a lot of barbs and a little abuse, and we got there. It's great for all of our countries.
When the Canadian delegation returns home from here at the G20, it will resume efforts to convince the Trump administration to drop those steel and aluminum tariffs. But the Foreign Affairs Minister hinted today Canada's best strategy may actually now be through the courts. Canada has launched a legal challenge to the tariffs, and while there are no guarantees the Canadians will win, it's at least a concrete action they can take. Vashi.
Thanks, Katie. That's Katie Simpson for us in Buenos Aires. So why did Canada ultimately agree to sign this agreement, even though U.S. tariffs on steel and aluminum have yet to be lifted? David McNaughton is Canada's ambassador to the United States, and he joins us now from Toronto. Hi, Ambassador McNaughton. Great to have you back on.
Good to be here.
Ambassador, you told Politico earlier this fall that perhaps a low-ranking Canadian official with a bag over his head would be the best person to pick for the official signing if there wasn't a deal on steel and aluminum tariffs. Clearly, that didn't happen this morning. The Prime Minister was there. Why?
Yeah, I mean, I guess comments like that from me illustrate the fact that I am not a career diplomat, and occasionally, I say things like that for. To illustrate the purpose. I mean, look, the reality is we are not happy that the steel and aluminum tariffs remain in place. As the minister said and the Prime Minister reiterated, we consider them to be illegal. We will be using every means we can, not just legal, but also, as you know, we've put retaliatory tariffs in place that are harming U.S. interests. And I think we're going to get to a point where they will remove them. We always said from the beginning that these two issues were separate. What I said frequently, and I know Katie knows this, Katie Simpson knows it, is that, it was going to be hard for us to be in a celebratory mood, even though we consider this to be a good deal for Canada, Canadian workers, and Canadian business, as long as those tariffs were in place. And that's why, while the Prime Minister and the Minister were there to sign the deal, we're still a bit subdued until we find a way to make sure that these tariffs are gone.
But they still were there. The Prime Minister was still there. What changed between when the thinking was, not going to this, not being part of the photo op, was the appropriate response to those tariffs not being lifted to, no, we should go? What changed?
Well, I think it was always the case that we were going to have a signing ceremony. The question really was, and I think you saw today that it was subdued on our part, and I think the Prime Minister made a very good point in terms of highlighting as part of the signing that we wanted those tariffs to be gone. So I don't think anything changed at all. We think that this new NAFTA is a good deal for Canada. And one of the things that people haven't talked about too much yet, but as part of the deal, the side letter on autos today is in effect. Well, the overall NAFTA agreement needs to have approval by the U.S. Congress and Mexico and our House of Commons. The reality is the protection against the use of 232 on the automotive sector is in effect as of today, and that's a significant accomplishment.
But did the Canadian government, did Prime Minister Trudeau, by appearing there today, just give President Trump the green light to keep those tariffs on as long as he wants to?
No, you know, I mean, look, showing up for a signing ceremony was a little bit of leverage, but it wasn't significant. The real leverage that we are exercising over the United States at the present moment in terms of the, you know, these steel and aluminum tariffs are that, first of all, they're illegal, and I think we will win in any legal dispute of it. But
how long will
secondly,
that take, though?
Well, I don't know. But in the meantime, we are hearing every day, and I am working with labor unions, with businesses, with communities in the United States, to just illustrate to them how this is harming them, and how, you know, working together, this is going to, you know, to get rid of these tariffs will be beneficial both to the United States and to Canada. You know, in the case of aluminum, even if every smelter in the United States came back to its full capacity, the United States could only produce 25% of its aluminum needs. So it's going to have to import 75% of its aluminum needs from somewhere. Now, do you want them to come from Canada, or do you want it to come from Russia and China and Kazakhstan? And I think that's why these tariffs don't make any sense from an American point of view, quite apart from our point of view.
Unfortunately, that message doesn't appear to be getting through. Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. Trade Representative, just today described them as successful.
Well, yeah, so I'm sure he did.
But what does that say? I mean, you say your leverage is the argument, the very salient and understandable argument.
I'm sure what Bob is talking about is that for you know, people who've been overproducing steel and aluminum, like China and like other countries, that this is starting to have the effect of bringing back American jobs in the steel industry and to some degree in the aluminum industry. But that deals with overproduction from countries that are non-market economies. Our relationship with the United States in terms of both steel and aluminum is long-standing. You know, we have the same union, the United Steelworkers on both sides of the border. We're not the problem. And I think ultimately, and I hope sooner rather than later, the United States will come around to that view. And I think there are lots of people in the United States, lots of businesses, labor unions, consumer groups, who are pressing the United States to lift these tariffs, and I think they will be lifted. And certainly that's our position, and we're not going to change it.
Is the goal still to have them lifted completely, or is agreeing to steel and aluminum quotas a possibility at this point?
It makes no sense to agree to
even with
to
room for growth?
It makes no sense to agree to aluminum quotas, because all that will do is open up the market to non-market economies like Russia and China. In steel, if we had a protection against the use of 232, like we have in the automotive sector, whereby you'd have to increase your production by 70% before they would even be considered to be in effect, we might consider something like that. But this nonsense about talking about managed trade on 2017 levels is just not on. It's just not on.
But there is a number on steel to which the Canadian government would consider that as a possibility. I'm not saying it's the 2017 ones. I don't know what it would be, but you're referring to the auto letter where there was a certain percentage of growth allowed. If that would be the case,
it wasn't just a certain percentage.
A big percentage.
It was almost a doubling of the industry before they would even consider.
Would it have to be something to that degree?
You know, what we're doing is we are consulting with our industry, with our unions, with the communities, and you know, before we would agree to something, we'd make sure that there was ample room for growth in our industry. You know, I mean, I grew up in Hamilton. I know how important this industry is to places like Hamilton, Sault Ste. Marie, and southwestern Ontario in general, and also to places like Regina and the western provinces. So we're going to hang tough on this. These are illegal tariffs, and we're not going to give way. We're going to find a way to work with the American interests who share the same view we do.
Okay, thank you very much, Ambassador. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks.
After more than a year of tough and unpredictable negotiations, a new NAFTA agreement has officially been signed. Canada, the U.S., and Mexico and their respective leaders held a signing ceremony to mark the milestone on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Argentina. It's still, though, the deal still has to be ratified in all three countries, and it also fails to address U.S. tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum industries. So is this really a win or more of a disappointment? Sarah Goldfeder is a principal at the Earnscliffe Strategy Group in Ottawa and former special assistant to 2 U.S. ambassadors to Canada. And in the name of full disclosure, Ms. Goldfeder lobbies for certain aspects of the steel industry. Hi, Sarah. Nice to see you again. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Was it the right move for Canada to sign this deal despite the fact that those tariffs remain in place?
I don't know that they had a choice. So probably yes. I think that this today was very much about President Pena Nieto. It wasn't even so much about President Trump. It's his last day in office, so it was a nice kind of capstone to his 6 years there. But it wasn't such a great deal for Canada to sign, and you could see that, I think, throughout the body language on the Prime Minister. And overall, I think that there was a fair amount of tension on the stage. But make no mistakes about it. This is the deal that is going to get signed. There wasn't another one coming.
The Prime Minister used his remarks to bring up GM, the closure there, but also to say, as a result, sort of link that with the tariffs remaining and say that they need to go. Do you think that has any kind of effect, or by showing up today, did we reduce whatever leverage was there?
I don't think there was any leverage there.
Okay.
So I
well, that sums it up. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the steel and aluminum tariffs are there to stay until the WTO makes a decision. I don't know that the WTO decision will be necessarily favorable for the Canadians or the Mexicans, for that matter, because both countries still have steel and aluminum tariffs levied against them. And
the WTO is also kind of scared of weighing in on 232.
Exactly. They're not going to. They don't like weighing in on national security. It's really hard for an international body to tell a nation state that they have a better sense of what may be in their national security interests than they do. So yeah, they don't like to weigh in on that. So I don't know that there is a solid pathway out of this, except for an acceptance of a new reality of managed trade, especially when it involves steel and aluminum goods.
And do you think that Robert Lighthizer, the U.S. trade representative today, described them as successful, which echoes something we heard when NAFTA was sort of first agreed to as well a few months ago. Donald Trump, heralding the use of them and saying that we wouldn't be here without them. Is that truly the perception, do you think, of the White House, despite what we're hearing of, the negative effects on American businesses as well?
I think, there's negative aspects from American businesses and there's positive aspects for American businesses. And so I think if you're looking at what the president was trying to do, which was increase domestic capacity and increase the domestic industry, he's done that. He has created an environment where the price of steel has increased by 60 to 70%, depending on what kind of steel you're talking about. He's created an atmosphere where the tariff wall around the United States is such that businesses are looking for domestic sources. That's exactly what he intended to do. And so I think in some ways, if you ask if these are successful, yeah, they're very successful. But I think and another piece of this is that this whole negotiating process and the 232 aluminum and steel tariffs and any further 232 tariffs are all designed around a narrative that this president has, an agenda that he has to kind of amplify 20th century economic interests and industries within the United States in a world that is moving fast past them. So I think what you see even within this agreement is an agreement that preserves kind of a 20th century manufacturing steel-based economy in a place where that might not be the future.
What do you think the chances are that an agreement is reached on tariffs that includes quotas? And I ask because we had Ambassador McNaughton on off the top of the show, and originally the government has long been saying no quotas, but he made a distinction between steel and aluminum, basically saying none on aluminum, but if there was substantial room for growth, it would be a possibility on steel.
Yeah.
Do you think that is a distinct possibility, that there could be quotas?
Oh, I think so. And I think that's the only way that they get negotiated around the 232 issue is if there is a TRQ in place or a tariff rate quota, which allows a certain amount of steel through. And that's what the Koreans did. And there's other countries that have done that as well on 232 tariffs. And that's what the side letter on 232 auto tariffs does. So but they've already kind of accepted it.
The room for growth there is so substantial. Do you think that you would ever get something similar in steel?
I think so. I think that maybe not as substantial as the one on automotive, but I think that you could make an argument for steel growth that's substantial enough for the Canadian government to find a way to negotiate that with and bring it back to its stakeholders and its own industries and say, is this workable for us?
What about, before I let you go, the path to ratification? Because we have talked many times about the new House.
Long and hard.
Yeah, so tell me what you think it will be like.
I think it's going to be contentious in the United States Congress. You have a Democratic caucus in the United States Congress right now, a new freshman class, if you will, of the 116th, that is a bit of a mix. So you have some people to the very far to the left that are not going to like the free trade deal or don't think it goes far enough, and then you've got a big old chunk in the middle who I think will be very accepting of this and may find a way to work with Republicans to get it passed.
Interesting. Okay, lots to watch. Thanks, Sarah. Really appreciate your time. Sarah Goldfeder.